In the life cycle of buildings, people come together to collaborate. At times, there is alignment of interest and enduring trust is built. I spoke with two people who have come together in many successful project collaborations over time. Lisa Staprans, a San Francisco-based interior designer who says, honoring, respecting, and trusting one another are critical measures of success in collaboration.
Like if you meet someone and there's going to be something like there's an ego game going on, or you're in my sandbox, I'm in yours, it's like, how are we going to work this out?
And Karin Payson, an architect based in San Francisco and New York, who emphasizes that respect accounts for enduring and repeated collaborations. Karin says of her work with Lisa, we bring light into each other's work.
She respects that I have skills she doesn't have, and I respect that she has skills that I don't have.
I'm Drew Lang, the founder of Brick and Wonder. This is the Brick and Wonder Podcast. Welcome to the Brick and Wonder Podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to be part of the Brick and Wonder network.
Well, I'm excited for this conversation. Lisa, I want to start out by talking about your background and the way you entered into the profession. So, as I understand it, you did your college degree at UC Berkeley, studied art, architecture, but then you ended up making your way to New York and starting your professional journey in New York, before then returning to California and starting your own studio. So, walk us through that journey a little bit.
So yeah, I did go to UC Berkeley, and we actually went in as an art history major and decided I really wanted to have more practical. I love art history, and I've studied it actually since the beginning of high school. I was always in the art history honors program in my high school, and I did a lot of studio art. And so I went into Berkeley in art history, and I transferred to fine art, and I minored in architecture. So I was both those buildings are right next to each other, Worcester Hall and Kroeber Hall in Berkeley. And I just found a love for learning about how you create spaces, and also through my fine art, being a printmaker, a photolithographer, and a painter. I thought I would move to New York City and be a studio artist, but I was always studying architecture as well because I cared a lot about how spaces were created and how we could make them really beautiful. So I went to New York. My partner, my husband, went to MIT architecture, so he wanted to go to New York. I thought, okay, I'll go to New York. That sounds cool. And ended up working in Knoll design in residential, more in the sales side of it down on Worcester Street in Soho, and loved it. And then I came uptown to Madison and 60th when we were at Knoll, and was doing more specifications and customer service. But I really loved the residential part down in Soho. But I realized I didn't want to be in the sales world. I really started finding that I liked the applied elements of being taking the fine art knowledge and practice that I had and how to use it in three-dimensional space. So I got a job at Cohn Pedersen Fox Conway back when they were a small little firm, I think 20 or 30 people. That was their interiors division of KPF. And I didn't know, this was back we called it then the roaring 80s, because I graduated from college in 84. And, I worked at KPFC in there, and I worked my way up from librarian to assistant designer, junior designer. And they would close down the Met for parties, or they would, have these events. I'm like, is this real? Is this how it goes in New York City? I like it here. And I really just took to it. I really loved it. I was very natural at it. I went back to night school and did more classes in interior design and in interior architecture. And I was fortunate enough to get a project that was my very first big project, 60,000 square foot home, ground up. And I was responsible for all the artisans and all of the, how we placed all of the beautiful Art Nouveau and Art Deco. And they had vast collections of pre-Columbian art. And I collaborated. Everything was made for the project. So tile artists, glass blowers. I was fortunate to bring in Albert Paley and Dale Chihuly. It was where I started. And I was like, I thought that was how it was. We didn't end up using Dale, but he did the prototypes for the dining room lights. So I was really natural with all the artists. And I found my art background really helped me. So I finished with that client. It took me 11 years. And I was in New York for about 7 years. I was bi-coastal for many years. Came back to California. I wanted to have a family. And I continued to finish the New York project. And this particular house was in upstate New York. So I left Cohn Pedersen Fox Conway. And I learned a lot about how firms operate. And I was very young and naive, and I went with the architecture firm to finish the house, and I helped him with starting his interiors division, and I got to finish the house, and the client and I really connected. And then I helped them do their house in Manalapan and in Aspen, and then went on to work for the nephew in Aspen. So it kind of just, my career just started to happen. And I started my studio in California, it was about 1990.
Thanks for that, Lisa. And Karin, I understand you started working in New York on big projects at Hardy Holtzman Pfeiffer. And then you made your way to San Francisco to start teaching at Berkeley, and then went on from there ultimately to have a kind of bicoastal professional practice and personal existence, which is really exciting. So just going back, Karin, talk a little bit about your initial journey and the way you made your way into the profession.
So I went to Champaign-Urbana and studied painting, fine arts, for 1 year. I learned a lot that I still use. I still have my color aid pack right here at my desk. But I really didn't want to be in college, and I wanted to stay as far away from New York as possible. And so my cousin was living at Berkeley. He was going to Cal, and he had dropped out also and done various things. And he was back at school, and he said, "Why don't you come to California?" And I didn't know anything about California. And I got a ride from a kid at school. I finished my freshman year, and I came out here for the first time. And the second summer, these two guys I met at Illinois bought land outside of Barstow in Southern California in the Mojave Desert and built a house. And they invited me to come down there. And so I went down there and helped them build a house that summer with hand tools, living in the hotel, the motel that I later saw featured in the movie Baghdad Cafe. I came back up here and I thought, oh, architecture, there's this school down the street. And then also my cousin was studying film, and so they were like the two influences. And so I went to Berkeley. And there I met, he was a lecturer, which is what I came out here to do, Mike Larson. And he saw my drawings, and I was really ambivalent, and he saw my drawings, and he just identified me as someone who was actually going to have a professional life, go to graduate school. Actually, he said, "Oh, you're going to go to Harvard." And I was like, "What? I don't know if I'm going to graduate from college." And he really gave me the focus and the self-confidence to a point to go further than where I was. And that actually is how I got into the profession. I fell in love with architecture through him. I always say he's now deceased, but I say he gave me my career in a very profound way.
Mm. So you finished your degree and your initial training at Berkeley, and then what?
And then I had one summer job with John Olson, who was an old modernist and contemporary of, he's deceased now too, but he was a contemporary of Richard Meyer, maybe a little older. And then I worked at SOM, and during that 9-month period that I worked at SOM, I applied to graduate school, and I went to Columbia and moved back to New York, and I started my career, and that's where, I worked at Hardy Holtzman Pfeiffer.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a good stomping ground to be learning the ropes in the profession. And then you came out to Berkeley, started teaching. And when was it that you started your independent practice? How did that come about?
I came out here in 1990 to teach at Berkeley, and I was teaching and I was working for this architect, Richard Brayton. And, it was so different it was so different than New York. It was a small firm. It was kind of a practice like I have, not in terms of the kind of work, but the size, and very design driven. But there was just no room for women here. Whereas like in New York, I got everything the guys got except for the money. And even I got that at the end. But here, there were just no women in these firms. And so it was a real struggle. He was really struggling with what to do with me because I'm not passive, I speak my mind. And so he and I simultaneously, I met this decorator who has become a world-class decorator. He's really well known. He's a great guy. I met him through Mike Larson, my mentor, and he was starting to send me work. And then Richard spoke very abusively to me once in the office. We were not getting along. So I put on my little New York suit and went in. And I told him that in no circumstances should he speak to me that way in front of the rest of the staff. And I quit, but it was like, no, you can't quit, you're fired. And Paul had sent me this project, The Decorator, and that was it. I started working for myself, and that was 1992.
Mm-hmm. Love it. So one of the important collaborators you came together with along the way and that have ended up working with many times over is Lisa Staprans.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about that and how your collaboration with each other has evolved and why it's endured.
Well, it's endured because we respect each other. We respect each other's skill set. And we have found that to be very, very useful. So she doesn't, even though her husband is actually trained as an architect, she doesn't really get in my stuff. She respects that I have skills she doesn't have. And I respect that she has skills that I don't have. Good interior decorating it's hard. And she's good. And I respect that. And she and I know because of that fundamental respect, we like each other because working together is a pleasant and productive exercise.
Yeah. We met, I came into a project with her in Menlo Park. It was a beautiful family compound. It was a bit of a tricky client. I met Karin. I'm like, okay, this woman, she is really smart and she's really good. I was a little intimidated because I didn't want to let her down. That's one thing I don't want to do is let anyone down. I always want to be a collaborator and layer in, but this was tricky. The client kind of used us against each other. And I didn't really know Karin yet. And we both got thrown into this situation and we both cared deeply about the outcome. And I have to say, when it got really tricky, and like I said, we hadn't worked together, I just had tremendous respect for her. We got through it and we kind of got glued together. I think the client maybe was hoping it wouldn't happen that way, and I don't know how intentional the client was about this, but the project turned out beautiful. And Karin and I were bonded in a way that we knew whatever would happen in the future, we would watch out for each other. So that was many, many years ago. And then a number of years later, she brought me into another project. And I just knew right away that wouldn't happen with that client. And she was doing all of the architecture for the project. And it was a really special family project. And it worked out beautifully. And I decorated and she did beautiful architecture and all the architectural finishes. Then I brought her to a project. That was a little bit of a tricky one again, but we both got through it and we watched out for each other. So sometimes it's not perfect. Sometimes it's amazing. And then we just did this other one in Carmel. And I just always, whenever I would meet her, I would meet with her first before I even showed the client the furniture boards and my presentations and my fabrics. And even though we had those things separate and I was doing all the decorating, I wanted to meet with Karin and say, Karin, are you okay with this? Because my goal is to make sure that the architecture and the decorating and the interiors are cohesive and that they complement. I don't want to go in there and just start decorating a space. I wanted them to speak to each other. It's really important to me. So I feel that we kind of got thrown together in adverse circumstances and we got through it with a tremendous respect. And I still have an extraordinary respect for her. And we just did a photo shoot last week in Carmel.
What would you say makes for a successful collaboration and how do you measure that success?
Absolutely. You have to have trust and respect for each other. And that's something that's just deep down. Like if you meet someone and there's going to be something like there's an ego game going on or you're in my sandbox, I'm in yours. It's like, how are we going to work this out? And that can only really start from that honesty and trust and respect that wherever we're coming from, we know we have a shared vision. Because even with things can get tricky. You may see things completely different. And sometimes as the interior designer, I do see it differently than the architect. And I really have a complete reverence and respect for the architecture. It's like, to me, that's sacred ground. But there are times when I might see something different because I also, in my career, have done a lot of interior architecture. And my partner is trained as an architect and he builds projects as well. But I always try to be very, very respectful and not insert or push my agenda. I try to say, hey, I want to see it from your side. And that can be hard sometimes when you're in the thick of it. there's a lot flying around, right? When you're in the middle of a project. So trust and respect, true collaboration comes from that. And then really watching out for each other, but not in the way that's the wrong way. Like there's a term in New York. It's like did a big project in Virginia once, and it's kind of the good old boys. I don't want any of that. No, that's
Mm-hmm.
not what I mean about watching out for each other. Not kickbacks. Not like, okay, I'm talking about you're making sure that whatever's happening as a collaborator and as a trusted relationship with, in this case, it's Karin, or with the architect I work with, or anyone I work with, that you're going to make sure if you have an issue, you're going to talk to each other and say, how can we, I'm not really comfortable here. What are we going to do about it? And I've been in situations too where the architect was no longer on the job. Maybe someone else has to come in. It didn't work out. And I wasn't involved at that point, but I still care deeply, like what happened, what went wrong. And sometimes it's the wrong fit. That happens. And even in my business, I tell clients, if I'm not the right person for you, I have wonderful colleagues around the country who maybe would be a better fit. You got to let go of your ego.
All that makes sense, Lisa.
You know, I don't know that I actually measure it with metrics. I don't think success is so quantitative. I'd say that I sort of evaluate it with the outcomes. They're a little bit
Yeah.
quantifiable, but it's mostly qualifiable. So, like in simple terms, like how do you measure the happiness of a client? How do you measure the happiness of the design team when everyone's done? It's like you feel good
Yeah.
and you say, wow, that was fun. That came out great. Can I work with you again? Oh, let's figure it out because we're
Yeah.
not in control. We're not the ones paying for it. Where are the opportunities for us to work together again or help each other out in some way? I mean, Lisa has sent me stuff that she didn't necessarily get involved with. And I've tried to send her stuff that maybe didn't work out because they hired somebody else. But, it's not so easy to measure. And I would say, like the project she and I just shot last week down in the Santa Lucia Preserve, that's a client that came to me first. More than 10 years ago, I met them. So this was our second house for this client. They came to me in 2013 to remodel and do a major addition to their house in San Francisco. And then Lisa was one of the interior designers I recommended for, furniture and decorative lighting. That's it, because we do the architectural interiors. And it went really well. And then when the client, after many years of showing me this property down in the preserve, when he was finally ready to do the project, there was no question, of course, it was going to be Lisa. And even though Lisa wasn't actively engaged in the project with a contract and billable time for 2 years, she was always in the loop. We didn't like bring stuff and say, Lisa, what do you think? But we just let her know, like, oh, look, this is where it's going. And then once in a while, it was like, well, what would you think? I know the client, I know Jason was like going to her and asking her for stuff and negotiating with her. But I also kept her in the loop. And that as soon as she started really doing design work, like 2 years into this project, around the time we started construction, she showed me what she was doing before she presented it to them. And that's pretty unusual. And so
Yeah.
we're all thrilled.
Yeah. So is an indicator and even the measure of success to do with this feeling of joy and, that comes out of the experience, and then, the resulting desire to repeat the experience with
Yeah,
that collaborator again.
that's a good, shorter way to say it. Yes.
Yeah. Lisa, I want to ask you about leverage. Tell me how you think about that with your relationships, with your collaborations. It's not a singular, like, okay, I'm going to leverage this person in order to get where I want, right? It's a we proposition.
The way I look at it is like by me bringing the best engineer or working with the best. Sometimes I bring the architect to the job. Sometimes I bring me to the job, or I may be researching engineers or builders. I sometimes do build whole teams for a client. I'm making sure I'm leveraging the relationships that I know. It's always a joy to bring a whole team together, but then I feel huge responsibility. Like they better be what I hope they are. That means leveraging. They better be able to come through and be problem solvers with me to make sure our collective project that I brought them to can be its best. So to me, the leveraging means we're all going to be showing up at our best, and we're going to work as a team. And we're also going to know when we are going to fall short. So when I'm leveraging with the principles of all these teams I may have put together, because I don't always have contact with the engineers, I often have contacts with the builder, but there's a lot of behind the scenes people. And I want somebody to be leveraging those relationships, making sure, okay, you're working with the best person. Are you sure? And I have had situations on jobs where I need to bring in, had a really tricky situation where it was a horrible situation with a builder and I had to bring in someone else and the builder was really taking advantage of them. And I don't believe that that person was leveraging, they were just milking it, right? And then when I
Mm,
sense that, I can't sleep. This is not okay. How can I be in business? I don't want to hurt anybody, but that's what I mean about the wrong kind of, watching each other's back. It's like, oh, I'm going to give you this if you give me that. No.
yeah.
So I believe leveraging is working as a team with a shared vision.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Karin, thinking about leverage in a positive sense, working with colleagues, using each other positively, giving value to each other, extending value to each other, and receiving, giving and receiving, giving and receiving, kind of ratcheting upward based on where each of you want to go.
Well, I think about it in the way I've pursued public projects. That's a
Yeah.
very clear straight line example of leverage because I was doing very high end single family stuff and we still do, it's great. I love it. But my heart was in the public projects. I had worked for Hugh Hardy. So that was really always my heart. But I've always had a small firm and it's like, how do you get in there? And so 20 years ago, the city passed a bond issue to renovate all of its 24 branch libraries and build 4 new ones. Everything had been closed for years. They just like Prop 13 killed public investment here. So anyway, I was already registered as a woman-owned business, but nobody would team with me because they all had their WBEs. And so there was no way in for me. And I really, really wanted that work. So I called a friend of mine who he's actually licensed, he's now retired, but he's a licensed architect who is a very busy lighting designer here in town. And I told him what I wanted to do. And I was like, who should I call? I mean, nobody will work with me. And he introduced me to the managing principal of what was then called Thomas Hacker Associates in Portland. Now they're called Hacker. And they have a subspecialty in libraries. And my friend David had worked with them on a bunch of libraries. So he introduced me to Jonah Cohen. And my pitch and the leverage was, I know you guys want to get into this market here. These are small projects, but I'm a WBE. I can be your associate architect. I know my way around the entitlement process and I can do interiors. And let's team up. And we did. And we won in the first round, we won a project. And the city was so happy with us that they gave us 2 more. And then one of them, the third one, turned out to be a new building. And so we worked together for 10 years on 3 public libraries, 2 renovation and additions, and 1 brand new building in the Bayview district.
That's incredible, Karin. Thanks for sharing that. Tell me about a significant setback that you've experienced in your professional journey and, how you got yourself out of that rut, and if you relied on someone to help you get out of that bad spot, who was that and what did it look like?
There are all different kinds of ruts that we get into, but I can't point to a specific setback. But what I can talk about is how I relied on other people in the past inappropriately. And it's because I lacked self-confidence for so many reasons that have to do with who I am, when I came of age, the horizons that were laid out for me and how I saw them. So I would say that for many years, I was hesitant to lead when I actually had the capability of doing it. And so I would rely on other people. And when you're like handing over your leadership role to somebody else, they're going to lead. And so, you can sort of hope they do the right thing by you. And in my case, most people did do the right thing by me, but it was their show, wasn't mine. And I don't know exactly when it happened, but it's been within the last decade, and I would say more recently than that, that I've really begun to own the leadership part of those relationships.
Were you talking to colleagues? Were you telling them what you were experiencing, or were you doing all this on your own? And like, what did that look like? That leap?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't so much colleagues I was talking to, although, yeah, I have a friend who is a colleague. She went to school with that same Mike Larson, who I mentioned earlier, my first mentor in architecture. So she's a few years older than I am. She's now retired and she's living in Italy with her Italian husband, but she was a principal at a big firm here in town called BAR and did a lot of housing. She was the housing lady. She was a frequent speaker at ULI conferences. I spoke to her a lot. She actually sent me our most consequential client. But I also spoke several times to a friend of mine who is a general contractor, very successful, quite a bit younger than I am. She's about 15 years younger than I am. And I first met her early in her career when she was working as a project manager. She was like 25, working for Ryan Associates, who briefly had an office in New York before the partners retired. And she grew up in a very worldly family, and her parents were public people. Her mother was a very successful PR agent for some pretty well-known media figures. She lived in New York City at a certain period in her life, but then they moved to LA. And so she mostly grew up in LA. And so that woman, I admire her so much. She has never had a self-doubt for a second in her life. And now I know well enough that she has, but she's never shown it. And I know her well enough. I've brought her in, I've gotten her involved in a few things that have been meaningful for her over the years. And so I know I can talk to her because I've done stuff for her without being asked. I've just done stuff that's worked out for her. So yeah, I called her when I was dealing, particularly, and this was the leap, when I was having trouble with this client. And this woman, I mean, I remember at 25, the project we did together was an older couple who owned a house that was built in the 1880s. And in San Francisco, that's rare. It's a very quirky house. It's really cool. There's a book called On the Edge of the World, which is all about that cohort of architects in San Francisco in the late 19th century. And the house is a spiral in section. I mean, it is really, and they were already in their mid 70s and they wanted to put an elevator in this house that's a spiral in section. And neither of them had ever worked. Think about this. A 75-year-old woman in the late 90s went to Yale Law School, was a graduate of Yale Law School. So they were very fancy. And Justine knew how to say very difficult, painful things to very powerful people. She's always known. And at 25, she knew how to do it. So I called her. I said to her, "Oh, you know me. I'm always putting myself down. I'm self-effacing to a fault. And I've just stopped doing that ever since I had that." And she didn't say to me, "You shouldn't be that way." I recognized it in myself, and I'm comfortable enough with her that I said it. And by saying it, I was like, what was I thinking all those years? I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah, she sounds really interesting. So, Lisa, what would you change about our profession?
I want the organizations that are supposed to kind of watch out for us. I mean, there's AIA, which I think does a good job, ASID in my world. Really, there's this sense that we have a professional code of ethics and conduct and that we have a foundation in the industry. I've had, in my interiors firm, I've had a lot of trouble with people saying they're going to do it and the shipping's late or it's cost me 10 times as much and people don't take ownership. And in my world, that means I have to deal with a lot of different reps and showrooms and product. I deal a lot with product and buying and procurement. And I feel like it's kind of broken. And I feel like the shipping industry is broken. And I mean, for architects, it's probably similar with supply chain and product. When you specify something you fall in love with and you really want it to work out, that you end up, if you really track the hours it took you to make sure that could happen and you fell in love with it. And it's almost like impossible to get it because it's so expensive or there's issues with delays in the supply chain. So I wish there was more maybe transparency and accountability and those layers. And also I wish that everybody on the other end of the phone, or if it's a robot, I'm learning to embrace AI more. So I'm going to get with it, I promise. AI and ChatGPT and everything. But I want humans to watch out for humans. I think that makes us human and it makes our industry what it is. I also think we have to be careful about getting sucked into the world of who's doing what and social media. And it happens to me too. I sometimes measure myself and go, well, I'm not doing that many yachts and jets today or whatever, or I'm not doing 10 chateaus in France. I mean, you have to just say it doesn't matter. Oh, our kids coming out of school. I think in architecture, the kids coming out of school, I think they're taught passion and how to solve problems. And I think I don't worry about it as much in the architecture programs, except for some that don't teach anything practical. It's just all very philosophical and we can't really do practical things. And so you have to train them. In my world, in the kids and the young people in interiors design, most of them come out, they don't really have a clue how a business is run or the sense of you're going to have to work your way up to prove yourself. And I think that's a bit of a problem too in our industry, that I want to make sure education can really prepare them for what they're getting into. So I think in our industry, how do we set expectations for the next generation? And how do we set expectations where we can keep that passion alive and also the problem solving and also how to run better businesses?
You know, I think architects don't get involved politically enough. And I don't
Mm,
mean running for office or showing up at protests. I literally mean getting involved with land use policy in the
yeah.
city that you work in. And it's something that I have been very active in. When I talk to people about it, I say that's my pro bono work. I did it kind of on my own when I first came to town. Oh, it was also through Mike Larson. It's so amazing how many ways Mike Larson has impacted my life. But through Mike, I met my member of the board of supervisors at that time. He's now retired. This was like long, long ago. Because I was pretty new from New York. I was used to as of right zoning, which doesn't exist in California. And that's another conversation. And so I was really interested in advocating for as of right zoning and streamlining the planning process. And I reached out to this politician, Mark Leno, and I said, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, I've got a committee going to study the issue of using FAR in residential work. Do you want to join? So I worked on that for a few years. And then I was invited to join the board of directors of AIA, and I wasn't a member. So I had to join the AIA. And we have a good chapter here. So I'm still a member, but the way I stayed a member was I got involved with land use stuff and it sort of dispersed. And then, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, a colleague of mine reconstituted the Public Policy Action Committee and he invited me to join. And at the time, he had a relationship with the role that's functionally deputy director, but the title is director of current planning, which is the deputy to the director of the planning department. It was a different administration at the time. And basically, it was Neil's little committee by invitation. And we would get together quarterly with the deputy director, and we'd all just scream at him about how bad their policies were. But then I got more involved. I co-chaired the committee for a couple of years. The leadership changed. The old director, I don't know if he was fired or asked to quit, but he was awful. He was embedded in all the things that are wrong with the planning department. The new leadership, which has been in place since before the pandemic, has been phenomenal. They really want to see change. The current deputy director, I've known her since she was a staff planner 20 years ago, and she's brilliant, totally brilliant woman, and she's risen up. And we have a seat at the table. It is amazing. We have worked really hard to cultivate those relationships. They're making massive changes, partly because they wanted to anyway, because the department was sclerotic, but also partly because of pressure from the state of California, and which has been in the form of legislation to override local control so that housing can get built.
Mm,
And this is what architects need to be doing. Instead of,
yeah.
just like being victims,
Yeah.
we need to sit at the table because we don't have the power. We're not the ones that hold the bank, the wallet, but this is a way that we can impact our communities. And I find it to be incredibly satisfying, but it's slow. We've been at this for years, and I'm really proud of my involvement because I see real results.
Yeah. I mean, look, clearly, if more of us got involved in this way, we'd have that much more influence. One final question. Is there a new collaborator you're currently looking for a project, for an internal company need? to help catalyze a professional ambition you have?
I'm actually in the middle of really rethinking everything because I've been struggling with how to be a better leader, how to run my business where my staff I can nurture and support. And also, I'm thinking, I'm in a whole reboot. Do I have the right staff? Is it the right choices I'm making? So I'm operations, and that's not my natural cadence. I love it when it works well, but it's not what I'm naturally good at. So I'm really working hard to find the right operations. I'd love to have a part-time chief of operations that I really trust. I'm kind of scared to admit that, but it's true. So I've got have some freelance help right now. We're trying to streamline and really and not be so stressed about the operations side. And also, I want to prepare for what's coming. I feel like we're in another transition in our industry. And my brand, I have 2 PR firms and I have my marketing firm, and I'm feeling really stretched thin. And I want to try to maybe pull it together so I don't feel like I have to talk to 3 or 4 different companies. So I'm trying to make that more cohesive for me. And it gets more complicated as you have book tours around the country and I'm branding out in the world. I mean, I'm even seeking a mindfulness coach because I don't want to be as flustered, and I want to be present. I don't like when people tell me, well, you're so busy. I don't like that. It makes me angry. I go,
Yeah.
I have a lot of things I'm working on, yes, but I want to be mindful about it. I'm seeking that kind of cohesion. I'm too spread out right now. And I know the operations will be key. And anyway, I'm open to suggestions. Some amazing guru might be out there.
Yeah, we can certainly brainstorm with you on that. Karin, are you currently looking for a collaborator for any projects, for any of your internal company needs, anything that you're looking to catalyze in the way of a new endeavor?
So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to work with new craftspeople on the fabrication side, because inevitably, and this is the fun part about the practice that I've built over the last 32 years, is that we do really bespoke work. And so there's always an opportunity to do really special pieces inside these buildings. But, like the handrail, the doorknob, the thing the stuff that people, the wall texture, things that people touch and they experience on a day-to-day level. And so I'm really looking forward to this project as an opportunity to work with some new fabricators and make stuff together.
Super fun. Well, Karin, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about you and your practice, your public advocacy work, anything that you have going on, what's the best way for them to learn more about you and connect with you?
I have a website. I do have an Instagram, Karin Payson _AD, and then they can reach out to me through either means.
Lisa, if people want to get in touch with you, to learn more, to work with you, where can they find that information?
That'd be so nice. Thank you. I have a book, The Soul of Design. You can buy the book through my publisher in New York, Pointedly Press, and it's actually on Amazon. Not that I really want to support Amazon, but that makes it more mainstream, which is exciting. So you can find me there, and then my website, Staprans Design, www.stapransdesign.com, and I'm rebuilding the website right now. I am speaking more and more around the country, and I hope to be speaking in Paris in January. I'm always in Paris at Deco Op and Maison Objet. I get a tremendous amount of inspiration. I go to Salone. I go to other trade shows around the world to make sure I'm aware of what other humans are doing in my world of beauty and decor and those things. And if anyone does get the book and read it, I really appreciate any comments because it was really hard to do. It took 27, 28 years.
Great, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
That was Lisa Staprans, a San Francisco-based interior designer, and Karin Payson, an architect based in San Francisco and New York. Lisa and Karin recently completed a second house together for a repeat client, and they look forward to collaborating on many future projects to come. Thank you so much for joining us. This episode was produced by the team at Radio Kismet, including Christopher Plant and Justin Berger. The production and editing staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Kerry Potter, Roya Osuli, and Ray Hirschfeld-Smith. I'm Drew Lang, and you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.